Hey, what's up? It's Jake. I'm editing this video right now. I just want to say I apologize for the focus in this video. It's not good. I used a different camera and I relied on the autofocus and it just didn't look as good. I'll have that fixed for reviews in the future, but just wanted to say that before you watch this. All right, enjoy the review.
This has nothing to do with the movie, but my local AMC opens up next week and I literally cannot contain my excitement that I'm going to get to see new movies in my favorite theater. Oh, I'm so excited. Project Power follows a cop, an ex-soldier, and a teenage dealer looking for the source of a pill that gives anybody that takes it superpowers for 5 minutes. Obviously, with everything going on this year, the summer blockbuster season was a total train wreck this year, mainly because there weren't a whole lot of summer blockbusters that came out, but this came out on Netflix the past couple of days. It kind of symbolized a nice bookend to what would be the summer blockbuster season, and so I thought I'd give it a watch, give it a review, and I'm excited to dig into it, so let's talk about it. And right out of the gate, I think there's a lot about this film that works. I don't think it's a perfect film by any means, and we'll get into some of the negatives in a little bit, but I think this film does a lot of things right, and particularly in its premise. I think it's really interesting, and I think what this film does best is it takes that whole concept of having a superpower for 5 minutes, and it doesn't rely on that. It doesn't overuse that, which creates a much more interesting experience when you're not relying on the one thing that's drawing you in. I think that's a really smart move from Netflix to not make that the end-all be-all of the movie. It relies on other things, and it relies on the actual story and the characters to make for an interesting experience, which I think is a really smart thing. And because they don't use the superpowers as much throughout the film, it creates a much more interesting experience when you have actual risk carried with whatever they're doing or the missions that they're going on. It creates a much more interesting experience rather than just watching a bunch of people with random superpowers fighting each other. When you actually have something going on that carries weight, that you can feel the risk that's going into what they're doing, it just makes it a much more interesting film in general. I also think this film does a really great job of presenting really interesting ideas and concepts, even though they don't all blend as well as they could have, and that's something I'll get into in a little bit. But I think there's a lot of interesting ideas here, and it kept my attention throughout the entire film to see oh, that's an interesting thing that they did there. I kind of appreciate that. And there are things throughout, like I said, that don't blend as well. They don't mesh together as well. But I still think there's some interesting ideas here and some really great potential for some other maybe spin-offs or other stories kind of like this that really take those ideas and run with it. I think they're really interesting, and I think they could go into some really interesting directions with the right people. Another thing that I really like about this film is the cinematography. It has a lot of stylized camera movements, especially during the action scenes, and it gives the film this energy while you're watching it. It's never boring, it's never stagnant, it's never just locked down and stand still, but it feels interesting. You feel the motion, you feel the energy while there's fight scenes or chase scenes or while they're driving in a car or something like that. With everything in this film, there's this energy because of the cinematography. It's always moving, and at times it can feel a little bit jarring. It can feel like there's not really a chance to slow down, but I think it works for this film. I think it supports the film very well. It gives, like I said, this energy throughout the film while you're watching it, and it's never boring. I was never bored throughout this film. And like I said, this film isn't perfect. This has its fair share of negatives, and something I already touched on earlier, but despite its really interesting concepts and ideas, a lot of it does not blend well. It feels very sporadic in nature. It feels very unfocused. It tries to be a lot of things at once, and I think that's very distracting, especially from a viewer standpoint. It tries to be like a crime thriller. It tries to be like a superhero film, kind of like X-Men. It tries to be this buddy road trip film for a little bit. There's a lot of things going on in this film that it feels all over the place, and I feel like if they had dropped a couple of the less important things, and if they really stuck to and commit to some of the other ideas and what it was trying to be, I think this could have been a much more engaging experience, but instead it feels a little bit all over the place, and it's just not as interesting. Also, at times, I think this can feel very cliche and very standard, especially for a crime thriller. It doesn't try to do anything super out of the ordinary. It's a pretty standard plot. It's very straightforward and just feels very familiar. And also at times it feels pretty outlandish, pretty ridiculous. There's a lot of things that are inconsistent about it. There are things that just don't feel realistic, and you have to suspend your disbelief a lot of the time. And it's nothing that like detracted from the experience. Obviously, with a film like this, you know it's fake, and so you do have to subject yourself to things that aren't realistic a lot of the times. But I think sometimes it gets a little bit too ridiculous. It gets a little bit too out there, and just in service of the plot and the story. So it's not as good or as grounded or as interesting, I think, as it could be. And touching back on sometimes it feels outlandish, I don't think the visual effects help that in any manner. I think sometimes it can feel very outlandish, it can feel very cartoonish, and feel very exaggerated, which I think if you're going for something very exaggerated, I think this film does that. But I didn't want it to be as exaggerated. I think with crime thrillers especially, you want it to be more grounded in reality. And there are other things throughout this film that give the illusion that it's trying to ground itself in reality, but sometimes the film just goes a little bit off the rails and it takes you out of that realistic experience, if that makes sense. In the end, despite its shortcomings, I think this is a pretty solid film overall. Like I said, it's not perfect, but I think it has some good action, some interesting concepts that keep your interest throughout the film. If you're a fan of like superpower type films, if you're a fan of like crime thrillers, I think this is a good film for you. You can check it out on Netflix for yourself. And I'm going to give Project Power a double tap. Man, this was nice to get to do an actual review by itself again. Like the last solo movie review that I did was back in May when I watched Trolls World Tour, and that wasn't good. So it was nice to get to do one of these again. And with my local AMC opening back up, I'll get to see new stuff coming out, like The New Mutants, which I've been waiting for almost 3 years now, or Tenet, which I am extremely excited for. So I'm really excited to be able to do more reviews more often as my theaters are opening back up. So if you don't want to miss any new reviews, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you will be the first one to know when I upload a new video. Also, follow my social media. I put all the links down in the description in every single video. I don't really plug my social media all that much, but I have Instagram, I have Twitter, and I have Letterboxd, which I log every single movie that I watch, and I write little reviews about them, even the ones that I'm just rewatching or putting on when I have homework on. And so if you're interested, if you want more reviews from me, you can follow me on Letterboxd. Alrighty, I think that's all I've got for this review. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.